Good morning. My name is Aiha Nguyen. I'm the Program Director for the Labor Futures Program at Data and Society Research Institute. I'd like to thank Dr. Ananya Raihan and iSocial for inviting me to participate in this discussion. I had the pleasure of working with iSocial colleagues as well as partners in India and Brazil to publish an anthology called The Formalization of Social Precarities. The project was inspired by conversations about how the Silicon Valley idea of a gig economy has proliferated over the years and what that has meant for the growing numbers of people pulled into this work, including workers outside of the United States. So many rich findings were arrived at in this project. The team in Bangladesh has continued to build out this important work, so I'll speak more broadly on three questions. First, I'll discuss key points to frame gig work and the report. Secondly, I'll offer some policy priorities that can support gig workers. And finally, I'll offer some best practices for global cooperation and what that might lead to. First, I want to make it clear, gig work has always existed and is not a new innovation, despite what Silicon Valley says. It exists because it is a fundamental way by which people find employment when formal avenues to employment are unavailable to them. This can be a consequence of various factors, but often those factors are manufactured by social and even political motives. For example, in the US, formal employment can be foreclosed because of factors that may or may not even be relevant to the job, such as race, gender, manner of speech, or other stereotypes about employability. As we learn from the process of working with our partners, historical and religious factors such as caste can delimit current day employment conditions. This works to employers' advantage. In the United States, fishing of work gained traction as companies contracted out work that would have typically been performed in-house to save money on labor. Over the past 2 decades, tech companies have further capitalized on this by claiming workers using their platforms are independent contractors and rebranding this type of work as the new gig economy. Gig work as a model is attractive to employers because it allows them to outsource and shift the costs and risks of doing business onto workers while reaping the benefits. Secondly, tech platforms can exacerbate and embed these social precarities in their technical systems. Despite promises that technology will democratize work, our research found that tech platforms can foreclose opportunities and entrench social dynamics. For example, rather than providing autonomy and true independent status, platforms often favor customers, given that gig workers often occupy the lower rungs of society, either economically, politically, or socially. This simply mirrors the power dynamics that exist in society. Our partners in India who studied neighborhood or gated community management platforms showed that these platforms relied on surveillance to control the behavior of workers that entered these communities, including gig workers. Often these platforms afford property owners technical tools for acting out deeply held beliefs about the trustworthiness of low-wage workers and thus control them. Finally, while platforms control and structure the work to their benefit, some workers liked the platforms and found new opportunities that they had not been afforded in the past. iSocial's excellent report on domestic workers, a workforce comprised of overwhelmingly women from lower caste communities, offer rich stories which illustrate this point. Their research found that platforms did offer workers some amount of control over their conditions of work, which otherwise would not have been possible. For example, workers could decide when they worked to account for personal and family needs. Others workers felt they were indeed entrepreneurs because they were able to control who they worked for and didn't have to work in the house of a single family. Platforms also offered a record of communication agreement between customers and clients. One worker was able to cancel a job when she arrived at a home and was not able to speak with the woman that she had booked the job with. Rather, a man insisted that she report to him, raising red flags about what that made her uncomfortable for her safety. In this instance, the worker was able to contact the platform who advised her to leave the job site. She felt protected. However, for the most part, platforms do not claim any responsibility for anything that happens to those working on the platform. And indeed, our research has shown that workers often get deactivated or penalized when customers complain. Gig platforms can mediate the transactions, but they are adamant that they are not employers. This leaves a vacuum of responsibility, liability, and creates a level of invisibility that makes workers vulnerable to exploitation. So how can these concerns be addressed? What major policy priorities are needed to adequately protect workers and reduce the precarity that many workers face on platforms? First, in the US, the main policy intervention revolves around addressing the issue of misclassification. That is, whether workers on gig platforms are indeed employees and the platforms have a legal responsibility to these workers. Technology has automated and accelerated this long-standing problem. Thus, regulating and holding employers responsible for those working on their platforms is one policy intervention that can protect workers. This gives workers rights to protections that others in more traditional employment relationships have, and also the right to collective action. However, as our partners know, rectifying this issue does not address other problems that workers face on platforms because of the social precariousness of these workers. Sexual harassment and gender-based violence is a major concern that was identified. Policy directives need to consider the power dynamics that are faced by low-wage and socially disadvantaged women, particularly those working in intimate spaces like private homes and gated communities. Thirdly, policies seemingly unrelated to work and employment can have implications for workers. Such policies which were meant to separate and segregate workers within a community, often under the guise of safety and security, is one. Our research into Ring doorbell cameras found the growing popularity of doorbell cameras and an overall social acceptance of surveillance as a marker for safety has resulted in a relationship between homeowners and law enforcement. While law enforcement grows more reliant on ambient forms of surveillance to address crime, what happens is that most of the people who are captured on these cameras are not criminals, but workers going about their job. And thus, there's been an increase in pursuing crimes related to property. Our partners in India, Ambika Tandon and Ayush Rathi have found that gated communities are designed to reinforce social divisions between castes and therefore workers. In Brazil, delivery work itself is often associated with a certain level of criminality. While in New York City, different laws and scrutiny apply for the leisure class using pedal-assisted bicycles and the working class using motorized bicycles for food delivery work, even though the difference in practice is nominal. This calls for careful attention to how urban policies and safety policies may be affecting workers. Finally, tech adds a layer of data asymmetry, which is in itself a layer of precarity. Workers have even less power because platforms use data collected by all workers to manipulate their behavior on platforms. And increasingly, data is also being used to determine wages, bringing up new concerns about wage discrimination. Data collection and algorithmic decisions based on these data are opaque to workers, making it more challenging for them to truly make decisions about how best to work on platforms. Regulations can provide protections for workers by establishing standards to address this information asymmetry and level the playing field for workers. Finally, this brings us to the question of what do we do as global workers and partners? What are some good global best practices? What we've learned is that context is important. Gig platforms are not simply about supply and demand, customer and client. Rather, gig platforms are calibrated by the social and political environments in which they exist. So this leads us to my first best practice, which is recognizing economic precarity is tied to social and political precarity. Secondly, however, the companies that create, use, and establish these systems of gig work are sometimes the same companies. Uber and Amazon operate outside of the US. Data labeling companies based in the global south are closely connected with the largest tech companies in the world, often based in Silicon Valley. And the principles behind what make the gig economy successful in the US are what make it successful in India, Bangladesh, and Brazil, essentially preying on the most precarious workers. This points to a shared experience and connection between workers around the world. Thus, another best practice we can pursue is to center the voice of these workers and provide context to the discussion on gig work, and also to find opportunities to work together and share experience and research. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate in this incredibly important work, and I look forward to future collaborations.